Hello everyone, and welcome to the endocrine system. So with this system we're going to be talking about all the hormones, we're going to be talking about all the glands that are associated with those and what they do, any kind of problems that might come arise from this, and how the whole process occurs. So we'll start off with, if I can get my system to work here, is a general idea of signaling. With signaling you have several different ways of doing this. We use hormones inside of our body, neurotransmitters. We have local signaling molecules delivered in a small area by cells. And then we also have pheromones. We'll talk about each one of these and how they work. The key is that target cells are any cell that have receptors for the signaling molecule. Anytime you have some kind of signaling, you have to have a receptor on the cell that's going to be receiving that signal. If that cell does not have a receptor, or that receptor is not working, then that cell cannot receive that signal. So this is a big part of that. So target cells that are going to respond to whatever signal you're sending have to have the receptor to receive that signal. When we talk about animal hormones, their hormones are produced, are cell products secreted from endocrine glands, endocrine cells, or some neurons. They're usually delivered to the target cell some distance away through the circulatory system. So with our hormones, most of the time they're created by a cell and then released into the blood, and they travel throughout the entire body. They interact or come into contact with pretty much every cell in the body, but the only ones that interact or the only ones that react to that hormone are going to be the ones that are the target cells that have the particular receptors for that hormone. So this allows us to tell the cells that we want to tell to do something and not involve all the rest of the cells of the body. One type of signal that we have is called a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are secreted by the neurons at the terminal button. So if you've gone to the nervous system notes so far, you'll know this pretty well. But they act only within that synaptic cleft. Alright, so that's their main focus area where they interact with the cell afterwards. So they're a very, very small area of focus that these neurotransmitters have. Local signaling molecules are secreted by many cells into the extracellular fluid, so basically into the space around them. So they're extremely potent. They cause a massive change all at once. But they're inactivated very quickly, and they stay within just the localized area. So they don't spread throughout the entire body, they stay just in a general location. Example would be the prostaglandins from injured tissue cause blood vessel dilation. Let's say you get bit by a mosquito. All right, what happens when you get bit by a mosquito? Well, the damage from the mosquito bite, including the reaction to all the stuff that the mosquito puts into you, causes these cells around that area to release prostaglandins. What those prostaglandins do is they signal the blood vessels to dilate. They send out some other signals to the immune system, and basically they open up the blood vessels, which cause the blood to start flowing there dramatically to that area, which makes the area swell up much bigger. It makes the area turn bright red because of all the blood, and it makes the area start to feel warm because of the heat from the blood there. So this is why when you get a mosquito bite, it swells up and turns red and gets warm. All of it because of this signaling process and the prostaglandins from the damaged tissues. And the last type of signaling is from our pheromones. These typically diffuse through water or through air, and they are there to target other individuals in the same species. So typically it's male to female, or female to male, sometimes male to male, to help basically tell the other groups of the species what's going on with that individual. Most of the time it has to do with integrating social behaviors, including with breeding. So if you've ever had a female dog in heat, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, because every male dog in the neighborhood is coming by saying hello and knocking on your door. And these are idea pheromones. They're releasing these communication molecules from one individual to another, signaling that they're ready to reproduce or something along those lines. Now within our body we have lots and lots of endocrine glands. Here's the ones we're going to focus on: the pituitary gland, the adrenal gland, the pancreatic islets, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the pineal gland, the thymus gland, and the gonads. We'll also be talking about the hypothalamus a lot because it is the main controller of all of these. So we're going to go through each one. You're going to need to know the examples of them, what the hormones that they release, and what they're basically in charge of controlling. Now, as far as hormone action goes, hormones induce target cells to transcribe genes due to specific functions. So one of their main things is they cause genes to either turn on or to turn off. All right, so the hormones go, they affect the cell, and they cause the production of something new, or they shut down production of something particular within that cell. So more or fewer proteins, the increase or decrease of secretions, the growth of that cell, or the apoptosis, which is the cell suicide, all kinds of things along those lines. So they basically trigger the cell to do something, often by causing certain genes to turn on or certain genes to turn off. When you have cell-to-cell communication, there are three main parts to it. You have the signal reception, the transduction, and the response. The signal reception is the signal comes in and activates the receptor. So again, they have to have that receptor in order to receive the signal. Right? If you have cells that don't have that receptor, then it's not going to do any good. It's not going to do anything to those particular types of cells. And then the signal becomes transduced to a molecular form that acts within the target cell. So something happens with that receptor. That receptor turns something on or does something inside the cell to allow it to basically spread throughout that cell and to act within that cell. And then the cell will then respond to that particular signal. It'll actually do something. It'll make the protein, shut down a protein, or do whatever that signal is trying to tell that cell to do. We have four main hormone classes that you need to know. All right, we have the steroids, the amines, the peptides, and the proteins. And so the steroids are derived directly from cholesterol. Yes, the same cholesterol that clots up your arteries and veins is the same cholesterol that we make steroid hormones from. And then we have our amine hormones, which are modified amino acids. We have peptide hormones, which are two of those amino acids hooked together and modified. And then we have whole protein hormones, which are large special proteins designed for signaling. Steroid hormones, since they're lipids, directly made from that cholesterol, they can easily diffuse across the cell membrane and the nuclear membrane. So they can literally go directly to your nucleus and directly to your DNA. So most of the receptors are found inside of the nucleus, actually attached to the DNA. Those receptors will be around on those DNA. And most often it will bind with the promoter region of a regulated gene, which we'll learn about later, or which you learned about in Bio 101. So it binds onto that promoter region, binds onto that area that either shuts down that gene or that activates that gene. So it directly goes and affects that gene and that DNA, going all the way through past the cell membrane and past the nucleus directly to the DNA. So typically will either upregulate or downregulate that gene depending on what the receptor is doing, depending on what that hormone is supposed to do inside that cell. Steroids can also bind to membrane receptors, so we can have some of them which will actually attach to receptors on the outside on the cell membrane and cause an immediate change in the permeability of that cell. So it'll make the membrane change its particular function, allowing certain channels to open up easier or close and never open up again, some kind of function along those lines. So it'll let something come in or something go out a lot easier or more difficult than it normally would, changing the permeability, changing the allowances of that membrane for things to go in and out. Amine hormones is a combination of a hydrophobic amine that can diffuse across the cell membrane. So since they're hydrophobic, they go well with those that lipid bilayer, and so they're able to pass across that that cell membrane very easily and the nuclear membrane very easily. And they're still small enough that they can do that also. So just like our steroid group, they can go directly to your DNA. The receptors are inside the nucleus, attached directly to the DNA, and when the amine binds to that receptor, the receptor structure changes, becoming an activated form that either promotes the transcription of the specific genes or shuts it down. So it can either open it up, allowing you to read a gene that you normally wouldn't be reading, or it can go lock on and shut down a gene that normally is read, but now the hormone is signaling to turn off. And then our peptide and protein hormones are very similar to each other. They cannot diffuse across the membrane. They're too big, have too many different charges, and the membrane just won't allow it. So they have to have the receptors on the outside of the cell membrane. And they often start what's called a cascade. All right, this cascade effect is literally like those dominoes you see where you knock over one, then knocks over two, then knocks over three, then knocks over five, and you get this huge reaction going on long, just from one little domino ticking over. You knock down thousands and thousands of other dominoes afterwards. And that's the idea here. So you have this one little hormone that comes in, triggers this particular receptor. That receptor starts doing one little reaction inside the cell, and that reaction starts other reactions, which starts other reactions, and gets this giant cascade that completely changes the processes of that cell. So hormone cascade, you got that plasma membrane receptors are activated, so you get the receptor activated on the outside. That receptor then causes the production of a secondary messenger inside the cell. So it starts making this little messenger. Right, that secondary messenger goes around activating several different enzymes to perform needed tasks, which can go on and do tons of different things inside the cell. So it activates and turns on a whole bunch of enzymes, which start doing all kinds of different functions and basically can make a massive change within that cell very, very quickly. An example we have is glucagon producing the release of glucose that we'll talk about later when we talk about hormones. So basically, it goes in and produces that messenger, secondary messenger cell or molecule, which is known as cyclic AMP, that activates a protein called protein kinases that eventually leads to the release of that glucose. And here's a nice little picture. It looks a little complicated. You got the receptor, you got the hormone coming in, hitting the receptor. The receptor changes this complex over to this complex. Then that little piece is able to go and affect the transcription of a gene. All right, so this is our cascade. We trigger one thing, which triggers another, which triggers another, and does the whatever ends up doing the function that that hormone wants the cell to do. You can have a lot of variations in response to a particular hormone. So one hormone doesn't necessarily cause everything to do the exact same thing. Cells can only react to hormones that they have receptors for. Right? So you're not going to have a sexual hormone that causes your fat cells to do something. Right? They're not reacting to that necessarily. So the cells can only react to hormones that they have receptors for. Those hormones can affect a cell's ability to react to other hormones. So you can actually have hormones that shut down other hormone reception. The cell must have the capability to carry out that particular response. If you're telling the cell it's time for you to divide and that cell is not ready to divide, it doesn't matter. You can put all the hormones you want on there, but if the cell's not going to do it, or can't do it, it's not going to do it. And then you can also have environmental cues that can affect the response. You can have things in the environment that can affect what's going on. It's affect the ability of the hormones or the ability of the cells to react to the hormones. Let's see. All right. So we're going to stop right there for now, trying to break these up in a little bit smaller pieces. So we're going to take a break, and this will be your part 1, and then you can continue on to the endocrine system part 2, where we're going to talk about the structures of the endocrine system, so all the glands and what those glands particularly do.